Have we got a... Are you getting a translation? Yes? Good. So, we don't have an awful lot of time. I'd like to just use some of that time to move into into the room in the treatment meeting. This very important idea of the treatment meeting. What is happening there, and what are we doing to help it along? I mean, this idea of dialogue. I think of it as being something really, really, really fundamental in human and relational life. Jaakko Saikula, the psychologist who's been very much part of developing this process, he's quite unequivocal. He just says, to live, you need two things. You need to breathe and you need dialogue. So that's one way of putting it. This is looking at how do we actually start our lives. We begin from the very beginning, as all infant research over the last 30 years has been showing, 40, 50 years, that the connection between the newborn baby and the mother or the people around is very active. The baby is there initiating and responding from the very, very, very beginning. It's what we do after we start breathing. We start entering into response and needing that response. I don't know, have any of you ever seen the shortest horror movie in history? Was an experiment from about the 80s called the still face experiment. Has anyone seen that? Where a mother is filmed in an interaction with her baby, who's lively and smiling and happy and doing all sorts of stuff, and then the mother is instructed to take a stone face. She stops responding, and in the course of about 30 or 40 seconds, the child becomes uneasy and then anxious and then desperate and then starts really physically falling to pieces. You see her whole physical being disintegrating because she cannot get the response that she's expecting from her mother. This is absolutely vital to her. It's as I say, it's a horror movie. It lasts 2 minutes, and then the mother is told to respond again, and slowly they begin to join up again. But this idea of dialogue as essential, as a component of relational life, which we live in, we are formed in, we find ourselves in response. So why on earth should that be difficult? I mean, what do we do to lose that quality in our conversations and in meetings and in our ways of meeting people? Because somehow I think we do. We learn ways of working and ways of being which get in the way of responding as whole human beings to the person across the room from us. And that can be due to the procedures. At one stage in psychiatry in Denmark, people had discovered that a very important factor was what they called lifestyle factors. So a procedure was introduced that when people came in crisis to services, then it was required of the professional to investigate the lifestyle factors. So a person who was coming in absolute desperate crisis, in the course of the first meeting, if you followed the rules, you had to ask that person, and how much do you smoke actually? And what do you think about, we could help you to stop smoking? Do you exercise enough? These questions were introduced as a requirement for the first meeting with someone in crisis. Of course, you can disobey rules, you can break rules, but as a rather ugly example of what happens, there are many institutional and systemic pressures which cause us to do things which stop us from actually responding. So what I have described up till now has been ways of bringing people together in a room where response might be possible. And then in the room, the work that is done is about safety and about response. So I've put up just a small slide there. What are the skills that are required to be in that room? Skills of, oh, it's gone again. There. Almost back. Skills of response and the skills of reflection. In order to do that, this kind of meeting is structured in a particular way. I think most people go to meetings, they like to have an agenda, they like to know beforehand what's going to be talked about and what are we going to end up with when we leave the meeting. And those kind of meetings can be absolutely essential, very necessary in many different circumstances. This kind of meeting is something that's just quite different. In order to allow response and in order for everyone to be safe, then you have to structure the meeting according to the context of it. Who is coming and why? And everyone who's coming to the meeting is very likely coming with a different idea of why are we here today and what do we need to do. So an important first step in the meeting is that the facilitators of the meeting start by creating a shared history, saying what is the history of this meeting? What has led us to be here? And that history would look different for you and for you and for you. So going around and checking with each person what has brought us here today in your view. And if it becomes obvious that one person there is there because other people thought it was important, then it's important to also know, so how was it for you to have to come here when it wasn't really you, it was your mother that wanted it? That's part of establishing the shared history. It comprises different needs and different understandings and bringing them all forth. So the job of the facilitators is to explore that history and on the basis of that exploration decide together with the people, so what would be important for us to talk about today? And that is the agenda, is what you reach in that opening process. So as I say, about ensuring that everyone is there, that you begin to develop a shared history together. Because what's happened before has very many different perspectives, but in the room together we can begin to share what's happening and rebuild a sense of social connection, which often has been very much threatened by the crisis. So I'm afraid I'm not very good friends with the screen up there. Doesn't seem to do what I want it to do. If it had been there, then you would see that one of the points that was there is that apart from creating the shared history, then the purpose of the meeting, what we're looking to do, is to create also new shared language for experiences which until now don't have words. Someone asked earlier, what is this idea of crisis? What is this idea of crisis in psychosis? And I said it was experiences which don't yet have words, which become so confusing and desperate because understandings just don't fit together. So new descriptions are developed which become very, very so personal and so incomprehensible for the other. So my understanding of some kind of force which has planted a chip in my brain to make me do something is a way of making sense of how my life feels for me. But that explanation is not acceptable or understandable for others, maybe not even heard before. So trying together to develop, could there be new words for that experience which we could share, which we could come to see somehow as something which we could work together on or be together in. And that is very much the purpose of this kind of meeting. The purpose of this kind of meeting is not to create an intervention. It's not for the professional to determine what should be done from here, what can we as experts inform you would be the sensible thing to do from now, or in other ways to try to change the family. The purpose of this kind of meeting is just that, to create the dialogue in which new words, new descriptions, new understandings can begin to emerge and begin to be shared. I've written up there this idea of increasing transparency, this quite important word of transparency, of knowing what is going on here. What is your intention? Why? What are these people thinking? If I'm in desperate need of help and have finally come to a place where there are people who might be able to help, but who also might have considerable power over me, they can determine maybe the course of my life. They can say that I need to be placed in some kind of other situation or whatever. It can be quite threatening. So to know what are the reasons for what is lying behind their words, what are they thinking, is quite important. And as I was saying before, this idea of why do we lose dialogue? There are very, very many professional codes of conduct which actually require that one just sort of steps back and doesn't reveal one's own thoughts. There is a sort of very narrow funnel of what can be said and what should not be said in a professional contact. So if I, as a professional, am thinking both at the same time that this sounds like an incredibly painful and difficult situation, which in every respect would become more difficult if you were to be in a hospital. And at the same time I'm thinking, but what is happening around you at this time is so difficult, so potentially dangerous, that my responsibilities, my professional responsibilities, my legal responsibilities oblige me to do that. It's very important for that person to know both of those things. That I actually have a doubt, an uncertainty, a conflict in myself about what is going on. And not just me, but if we're a team of professionals, that we might see differently. There might be someone there who thinks that here there is obviously a need for some kind of stay at the hospital, and someone else would think, no, that's really not the case. in many professional contexts, it's bad style to sort of become, to disagree in front of the client. Here, there is really an idea that disagreement, that multiplicity of views is valuable, it's rich, it's important. It relates to valid elements in the total situation. And the task, the challenge, is to find ways of expressing that and talking about it without it becoming a fight, but a fact that these differences are present and they are active and they are incidentally really part of the confusion and desperation that's in the room at the moment, because they represent real dilemmas. So that is precisely what needs to be talked about. So this transparency is also about bringing up the very different aspects that might be in the room at the same time. So, perhaps I could just very quickly build on the example I was giving before with this young woman who, when we met with her and her husband and her mother-in-law, and there was one social worker called in from an agency. Then actually when we began to talk, this question of what would you like to talk about was just absolutely much too much for her. She didn't want to talk at all. She wanted to disappear and let the world disappear and be left alone. But she heard the other people saying what they wanted to talk about. And in the course of the meeting, quite a rich picture began to be built up of the course of the last few weeks, in which the enormous pressure of uncertainty about what will happen when my child comes gradually hollowed out what before had been the great joy of looking forward to the child. A very well-known, I think, quite common process, but in this case, very, very difficult. And in that description, this woman who, in her ideas of having to damage the child, was thinking that it would be better for the child not to be there, because she was going to be such a bad mother that child would not have any good life. She heard herself being described as a person who had really had a feeling of joy at this idea of the child that was coming, and was seen by everyone around her as someone who would be absolutely able to give what was needed. I mean, these are very, very, very simple things, but just allowing those things to be said, and be said in a way which were not directive, that were not telling her what to do, but where she could hear them, and then she could hear the professionals who had heard them as well talk about what they'd heard, saying, well, this really, really frightening situation, on the one hand, really relates to, if something should happen, well, that would be, we really need to make sure that that doesn't happen. But at the same time, we hear that everyone sees this young woman as being very, very able to deal with the situation, and being, well, just the right person to be there with her child. And having first heard it said by her family, and then heard it said by the professionals, she told us later, she said that just that experience marked a point at which something changed for her. And I know that at this kind of talk, it's dangerous to bring up the sort of super examples, because there's also lots of examples of where something doesn't work like that. But I think that this shows a very important point of how simple something can be, that really, really being heard in what is the extent and depth of my fear, but also what other people see around me. That in itself is important and can allow movement. Not huge movement, but just enough movement to say, okay, maybe it would be a good idea to meet again tomorrow, because maybe things can be different than I thought. And it continued from there. Just a short example. I think I would like to give you the chance to talk. Just one small point about this is that in this meeting, this idea of this type of meeting, the facilitators have that important function of opening the meeting so it's safe enough, of ensuring that every voice is received, heard, responded to, just responded to. That the dialogue continues from there, and that the meeting is closed in a way that it's also safe enough for people to go out of the room. So that closure would involve saying we've talked about these things and these things, these important things. Maybe there are many more things that we need to talk about. When should we meet to carry on, or what would your need be in order to carry on, so that the meeting is also closed. So thinking of this idea of uncertainty, then at no point have in that situation radical decisions been made to change the situation, but at every point, by attempting to allow the concerns and thoughts of the people involved to be present, then it's possible to look at each other and say, okay, are we okay to move this far? And when we've moved that far, we'll meet again. Who would we meet with then to carry on for the next step, and then the next step? It's staying in the very, very present moment and saying, what can we do from here? So I think that probably I'm going to ask you to just use 3 minutes to digest, and then we'll use the last quarter of an hour to talk together with questions. Okay? So just think about what you've heard, talk with your neighbor, and then we'll take a quarter of an hour with questions or comments. Okay. We're getting towards the end. I hope that I have given just a picture of what this kind of work involves and what the ideas behind it are. Of course, I wish we had another 2 weeks to talk together so we could begin to talk about what it really is, but that's life. So just for the last quarter of an hour or so, please, any comments, questions?
Olá, são 3 questões. A primeira, se os diálogos abertos, o senhor entende que os diálogos abertos podem ser entendidos como uma ferramenta de gestão de rede. Então, a gente está tratando de casos individuais, se eu posso tentar aplicar os diálogos abertos em reuniões de rede para fins coletivos e não individuais. Se a participação dos profissionais nessa reunião depende de características pessoais deste profissional, de habilidades ou mesmo de vocação ou simpatia pela prática. Estou pensando em, por exemplo, em muitas das nossas equipes aqui no Brasil são constituídas por profissionais concursados, contratados para um cargo público com uma estabilidade, então não necessariamente eu consigo demiti-lo ou admitir um novo com muita facilidade. Então não depende muito do perfil daquela pessoa para estar no cargo. E se dentro dos diálogos abertos, pensando numa equipe multiprofissional em várias ciências, a medicina, a psicologia, o serviço social, se eu dependo de uma ou de uma transdisciplinariedade dentro dessa equipe para que os diálogos abertos aconteçam ou não, se eu consigo garantir a realização de uma reunião sem pensar na permeabilidade dessas ciências. Se eu consigo trabalhar individualmente ali, cada um na sua área. Obrigada.
Okay. You promised me 3 questions. I think there are at least 10 there. Perhaps I could just start by going back to the very first thing I said was that when I'm talking about open dialogue, it's on different levels. There's an organizational level, which involves a complete integrated system working on these principles. And there's another level, which is about the actual meeting practice, what happens between the client and the professional. And the third level is the education and training. So if I heard your questions right, I think they all refer to these different levels, really. That if fundamentally the hope is to be able to meet in a more human way the person in crisis, relationally and in dialogue, then of course that can be done individually, that as a therapist or as in any other function, to meet the other person and to be able to engage in dialogue with them in a way which helps new words, new shared languages to emerge, to describe experiences which don't have words before. So in that sense, yes, individually it can be done, and when you begin to move into the larger system, then there are all kinds of challenges to that happening. Describing these principles, then I've said these are these are ways of helping to establish that room, that framework in which a dialogical conversation can take place. So if you can realize these conditions, then that will really be a help towards that. Also allowing different people, different professions to be in the room and still maintaining the dialogue. But very often you'll be working outside of these conditions, and you'll be sitting in a room and there'll be another person, maybe another professional, with a different idea of what should be done, maybe a different economic framework for what can be done. There can be all kinds of professional and personal power struggles going on. I mean, you can name it as you did. So of course those things become very challenging, and if we are to offer a real dialogue, then it really does require skill to guarantee that the meeting will be reasonable. It would be really terrible to invite a person in crisis to come to a meeting where all kinds of other people with all kinds of different opinions shout at each other because they want to be right about what should be done. So that comes to the third level, of course, of training and education. Yes, it requires, I think, particular skills, not specific professional skills, but particular skills to work in this form. As a professional, my profession is, I'm originally a psychologist. I don't work very much in that sort of specific framework, but that's my background and a lot of my experiences there. And when I'm invited to a meeting, of course, people invite me to the meeting because they think that I will be able to contribute with that experience. So there's a reason for me being there. And if there's a doctor there who has a very different opinion from me, then that person has also been invited because they have an experience which could be useful. So the skill of being there and being there with potentially great disagreement and great also emotional distress connected to that disagreement is quite considerable. And that's where this other idea of the reflective process, of reflection, of being able to take a step back from the conversation and look at what has been said here, and what can we think about what has been said, the conversation about the conversation, to allow the space for those different and sometimes competing viewpoints to be there. So I think your question was, is it possible to meet in this way with other agencies who maybe who are used to working in a very different way and come into the meeting with very different approaches? And I can only say, yes, that's challenging and sometimes very challenging. And my personal experience is that very often it's much more difficult for the professionals to adapt to this way of working than it is for the families to be in it. They tend to very quickly understand or have an experience of something which is useful and helpful for them. Where many often then that's a longer process for the profession to see how can I actually be useful and contribute to this, for me, very foreign situation. So I don't know how many of your questions I answered, but would it be okay to move on? I think you were looking. Sorry, there was this woman here was really first. So I'll come to you afterwards.
Eu entendi que esse tipo de proposta que você traz aqui, de certa maneira, requer uma comunidade fortalecida, famílias fortalecidas, laços sociais, né? Como eu imagino que venha do país, do seu país de origem. A minha questão é o quanto que relações sociais deterioradas socialmente por desemprego, por exploração no trabalho, por violência e por outras questões, por exemplo, o próprio desmonte que o nosso sistema de saúde vive hoje. Quanto isso pode comprometer esse tipo de experiência tão bonita que você traz aqui?
Thank you. And of course, that's a hugely important point. In bringing these ideas, then this is a description of what has shown itself to be useful and which has managed to find a form and an organization in a particular context, in a particular society, where it was possible to realize these things. And I find it beautiful to look at it and see it and be inspired by it. In my own country, in Denmark, which is very well organized, very bureaucratic as well, very strong public service, then it's been extremely challenging to bring some of these ideas in, because the provision of services is so very, very regulated and keeps a very, very firm control of what's happening. So that in itself has been challenging. So just moving from Finland to Denmark is already a cultural context which changes so much that we need to look at. So how could we create organizations and forms that would allow these principles to operate? And of course, if you go further afield, then that would be, again, new questions. How could we create those? In terms of the people that we're meeting with and the other, you didn't say this, but it was almost other requirements to how the family functions to be able to do this. At the moment, I work in a different kind of service, which works with people that have really been in psychiatric services for 30 or 40 years with the most severe diagnoses, and also with concurrent substance abuse, have burnt all their bridges, lost their families, lost their social network, lost their any form of anchor in the general society, and are thoroughly institutionalized. So my work at the moment is really trying to say, what would be a framework which would allow dialogue to arise with such a person who's lost all faith, all trust, all interest in me as a worker, who doesn't believe that I'm listening to him, and is really threatened if I invite invite other people to be in the room, then okay, then now there's just 5 of them trying to tell me what to do. Yes, also the people that we're working with have needs to feel safe enough, and maybe this kind of meeting that I described would just be ridiculous to propose for someone who can't sit still for more than 3 minutes, who doesn't want to listen to anyone, doesn't trust anyone, who's frightened. So perhaps there would be other places that would be necessary to start first. But the ideas of integration, of trying to collect as many possible voices and allow space for them to be there, I have also experienced, also with these people, can be astonishingly strong. That someone who has been in services for 30 years would, at the end of a meeting like this, say, I've never experienced before that someone actually heard what I said. This is the first time someone has listened to me. So the importance for me, the vital importance of that project is to find how could we do this in a way that those conditions could be realized. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Sorry.
Bom dia. Primeiro, agradecer a riqueza da tua fala e te perguntar da sua experiência se seria simplista eu dizer que a crise é a crise existencial com a incerteza do tempo de vida. E na sua experiência também, se você vê um paralelo do diálogo transparente com o convite para a livre associação freudiana. Obrigado.
Two questions. I think when I try to answer, we'll see if I understood them. The first question, do I see the crisis as the existential crisis of being in life? The short answer is yes. I think there can be many factors around that and influencing that and precipitating that, but the experience of the crisis is partly existential but also relational. How can I be in the world in my relations? So beyond the inner existential experience, there is also what is being, how am I anchored in my world by the people around me and with the people around me, as a way of addressing that existential crisis. I think as the many different user and recovery movements around the world have been saying for years and years and years, don't ask what is wrong with me, ask what happened to me. This has been the appeal from users for many years. Don't say what is wrong with me, but look for what has happened to me. How has my life brought me to this point? In terms of, I'm not sure that I quite understood your second question. I can just try and say one short thing, we'll see if it addresses it, that in this way of working, I think the idea of insight is very much less important than the idea of bodily experience, of being able to recognize in what happens in me, in my feelings, as being addressed to and originating from real experiences in my life. And that's not necessarily an intellectual insight, but very much a bodily, experiential, existential experience. I'm not sure if that answered you.
Eu acho que sim. É que eu vejo um paralelo dessas experiências físicas até existenciais no vínculo de transferência e contra-transferência nas associações livres da escola freudiana. Obrigado.
Thank you. I'm a little bit concerned about the time. So if I invite a question here, and we'll see if people are polite and stay here or if they just get up and go. You need to turn the microphone on.
Olá, bom dia. É uma pergunta simples. Se já houve, nessa experiência dessa primeira conversa, uma pessoa colocar que seria muito importante que uma outra estivesse ali, mas essa outra pessoa não estava na cidade, às vezes estava em outra cidade ou outro país, e se houve o uso de Skype para fazer uma conversa com essa pessoa, que seria muito importante estar ali, não tinha como estar fisicamente, mas se houve o uso do recurso de conversa por Skype. É isso. Obrigada.
Thank you. That was a lovely, simple question. Because I can just answer yes. Did you get the answer?
Sim.
The answer is yes, I have used Skype. We've used just the telephone in the middle of the table. Any way in which it's possible to bring the person into the room. And sometimes it's not possible to bring the person into the room because they're a long way away, or because they're doing something else, or because they're dead. In that way, then this idea of the social network perspective is to try and bring the voices in the room together, but if not, then at least to have their presence there. I think this is very usual as well in other kinds of network or family therapy, to invite the voice of the person who isn't here. So how do you think they would see this situation, or what would that mean to your father who isn't here? So both in that kind of way of ensuring that the perspective that includes the whole network is there in the room, and using technical means if necessary or possible, that works fine. Okay.
Obrigada.
So, thank you for this morning. We're going a bit over time, so I guess we need to now. And I hope that I've given you some picture of what this is about. If you're interested in it, then you'll find plenty of articles, both research and theoretical articles. Look for Jaakko Saikula, particularly, and you'll find some plenty of literature. Or Mary Olson in the States as well.
Em nome da professora Clarissa Corrade, que precisou sair, né, que é a organizadora desse evento, gostaria então de agradecer a todos vocês pela presença e agradecer mais uma vez o professor Richard pela disponibilidade de compartilhar essas ideias hoje conosco, tá bom? Obrigada a todos.